Hi there, my name is Leonard Patterson, and today I'll be asking the question, are disjunct Arctic alpine shrub and herb populations on the shorelines of Lake Superior threatened by climate change? So why does this question matter? Well, unique assemblages of Arctic and alpine plants have persisted in shoreline habitat at Lake Superior since the last glacial maximum. The persistence of these populations is due in large part to the harsh microclimate that has prevented boreal species from encroaching from nearby forests. However, rising global temperatures are predicted to moderate the shoreline microclimate and facilitate the movement of boreal species into shoreline habitat, where they will outcompete Arctic and alpine plant species. As you can see from the species distribution maps here, several of the Arctic alpine plant populations at Lake Superior are geographically isolated and are at much lower latitudes than their core populations. Because of their trailing edge distribution, these populations experience warmer climatic conditions and more frequent and severe climatic events than their core populations. As a result, these populations have a high potential for unique genotypes that may be important for adapting to future warming and that are likely not represented in core populations. Therefore, quantifying the threat that climate change poses to these genetically distinct populations at Lake Superior will help direct conservation and in situ management efforts. So my objective here is to determine if disjunct Arctic alpine shrub and herb populations on the shorelines of Lake Superior are threatened by climate change. To answer this question, we collected data from 40 sites along the northern shoreline of Lake Superior and selected sites based on the presence of exposed bedrock shoreline and the geology of the bedrock. We selected 4 unique bedrock types: igneous volcanic, igneous intrusive, metamorphic intrusive, and metamorphic gneiss, and did 10 replicates of each bedrock type for a total of 40 plots. To measure shoreline temperature, we placed eye-button temperature loggers at 5 locations along the shoreline where they recorded daily temperature values between 2020 and 2021. This raw temperature data was then summarized by month and assigned to plots based on proximity to the nearest logger. So here's an example of the exposed bedrock shoreline. So at each site, we set up our 10 meters squared plot and sampled 3 representative bedrock cracks and 3 shoreline pools in each plot. And in each plot, we recorded the name of each vascular plant species growing on the margins of the shoreline pools and in cracks in the bedrock. So here we have a snippet of our data table. Our observed predictor variables are mean annual temperature, which is a continuous variable, and bedrock geology, which is a categorical variable. The response variables here are species presence-absence counts, which have then been placed into groups based on functional group and biogeographic affinity. So to analyze the data, I first used a principal coordinate analysis with Bray-Curtis distances to visualize the relationship between groups of species, mean annual temperature, and bedrock geology. So we can see down here in the bottom left corner that Arctic alpine shrubs and forbs are strongly negatively associated with mean annual temperature. We can see that most of the metamorphic gneiss sites are also down here, so they're also negatively associated with temperature. And we can see that there's quite a spread in terms of the association between boreal species and mean annual temperature. So boreal plants do not appear to have a unifying trend toward a particular temperature range, and as such are not particularly reliable predictors of boreal plant encroachment. Notably, we can see that none of the boreal plant groupings are positively associated with mean annual temperature, and this suggests that these populations are not likely to benefit from future warming. So the last method that we used to visualize our data was a multivariate regression tree. And there's a lot going on in this graph, but if I just draw your attention up to the top, as we move down our tree here, we'll go past metamorphic gneiss, and then here we have to our cold mean annual temperature, and here's where we have our high proportion of Arctic alpine forbs and shrubs, as well as boreal forbs and shrubs. And this is a similar result as what we got from the principal coordinate analysis. So one possible explanation is that perhaps the metamorphic gneiss weathers at a faster rate than the other bedrock types, and thus has a greater microhabitat abundance. However, this doesn't explain the lack of preference for bedrock type exhibited by all other plant groups. But one benefit that we have of the multivariate regression tree is that at each split here, we get an estimate of the proportion of variance explained. So if we were to add up the amount of variance explained for temperature, that comes out to roughly 21% while the variance explained by bedrock geology was only 9%. So therefore, it's likely that the association between these species in bedrock type is being conflated with temperature or other physiographic factors, as these sites are located in highly exposed areas of the shoreline that have particularly cold mean annual temperatures. So therefore, bedrock geology does not appear to be a particularly useful predictor of boreal plant encroachment. So in conclusion, there's no clear indication that boreal plant species are associated with a particular temperature range or bedrock geology, and therefore the Arctic alpine plant species at Lake Superior do not appear to be threatened by climate change. Temperature does, however, appear to be a strong predictor of Arctic and alpine plant diversity, and therefore could be useful in identifying areas of the shoreline that have high conservation value as climate refugia. So while we can conclude that these populations are not greatly threatened by climate change-induced boreal plant encroachment, the extent to which these cold-adapted species may be threatened by other climate-mediated processes is largely unknown, and therefore we cannot categorically conclude that these populations are not threatened by climate change.